Martha had always been a hopeless romantic. From a young age, she had dreamed of finding her Prince Charming and living happily ever after. She had met her husband, Jack, in college, and it had been love at first sight. They had dated for a year before he proposed, and she had said yes without hesitation. Their wedding had been a beautiful affair, with all their friends and family present to celebrate their love. They had bought a small apartment in the city, and Martha had quit her job to focus on starting a family. They had a son, Henry, a few years later, and Martha had never been happier. But as time went by, things started to change. Jack worked long hours at the office, and they started to drift apart. Martha tried to talk to him about it, but he always brushed her off, saying he was too busy to deal with their problems. One day, Martha came home from running errands to find the locks on their apartment changed. When she knocked, Jack answered the door with a look of contempt on his face. "I'm leaving you, Martha," he said coldly. "I've met someone else, and I want a divorce." Martha was in shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. She tried to reason with him, begged him to change his mind, but it was no use. Jack had made up his mind, and there was nothing she could do to change it. The next few days were a blur. Jack took everything they had built together, their apartment, their savings, and their future. Martha was left with nothing but her clothes and a few personal belongings. She found herself homeless and alone with a young son to care for. She didn't know what to do or where to turn. She felt betrayed, hurt, and angry. How could Jack do this to her and their child? As she sat on a bench in the park, holding Henry tightly, she vowed to make Jack pay for what he had done. She didn't know how, but she was determined to get back on her feet and show him that she didn't need him to be happy. Martha's first priority was finding a place to stay. She called every friend and family member she could think of, but no one was able to help her. She spent a few nights in a shelter, but it was a terrible place, full of drug addicts and criminals. She knew she couldn't stay there with Henry. One day, as she was walking down the street, she saw a sign that read, "Room for rent." She knocked on the door, and a kind old woman answered. Her name was Edna, and she had a spare room in her apartment that she was willing to rent out to Martha and Henry. The room was small and modest, but it was clean and safe, and that was all that mattered to Martha. She took it on the spot, and they moved in that same day. Edna was a wonderful landlady. She treated Martha and Henry like family, cooked them meals, and helped Martha find a job. Martha started working at a local cafe, and things started to look up. Despite the hardship, Martha was determined to rebuild her life. She had a supportive community of people around her, and she was slowly but surely getting back on her feet. One day, a few months after Jack had thrown her out, she received a phone call from him. She was hesitant to pick up, but something inside her urged her to answer. "Martha, I need to talk to you," Jack said when she picked up the phone. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left you and Henry. I miss you both so much." Martha felt a mix of emotions when she heard his voice: anger, sadness, and confusion. She didn't know what to say to him. He had hurt her so deeply, and now he expected her to forgive him just like that. "I don't know, Jack," she said hesitantly. "I need some time to think about this." "I understand," Jack said. "Just know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you, Martha." Martha hung up the phone, feeling overwhelmed. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Jack for what he had done. But a small part of her wanted to believe that he was sincere and that he had changed. Over the next few days, Martha thought long and hard about what to do. She talked to her friends and family, and they all advised her to be cautious and take things slow. Jack had hurt her before, and there was no guarantee that he wouldn't hurt her again. Finally, she decided to meet with Jack and hear him out. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop near her apartment, and when she saw him walking towards her, her heart skipped a beat. Jack looked different than she remembered. He had lost weight, and there were deep circles under his eyes. He looked tired and sad, but also hopeful. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said as soon as he sat down. "I know I hurt you, and I can't take it back. But I want to make things right. I want to be a better husband and father to you and Henry." Martha listened to him carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. She could see the pain in his eyes, and she knew that he meant what he was saying. They talked for hours, going over the past and the future. Jack promised to go to counseling and work on his issues, and Martha agreed to give him a second chance. It wasn't easy, but over time, Jack proved that he was committed to making things work. They went to therapy together, and he took responsibility for his actions. He apologized to Martha and Henry, and he worked hard to rebuild their trust. And eventually, they found their way back to each other, stronger and more in love than ever before. But just when everything seemed to be going well, a new twist in the story unfolded. One day, Martha received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as Jack's mistress. She said that she had been seeing Jack for years and that she had no idea he was married with a child. Martha was shocked. She didn't know what to believe or who to trust. How could Jack have done this to her again? She confronted Jack about the woman, and at first, he denied everything. But when Martha showed him the proof, he broke down and admitted that he had been seeing her on and off for years. Martha was devastated. She had given Jack a second chance, and he had betrayed her again. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him for this. Jack begged for her forgiveness, but Martha needed time to process everything. She kicked him out of the apartment, and he went to stay with his mistress. For months, Martha was lost in a sea of emotions. She was hurt, angry, and confused. She didn't know how to move on from this latest betrayal. But eventually, she found the strength to pick up the pieces and move on. She filed for divorce, and she focused on rebuilding her life for herself and Henry. It wasn't easy, but she knew that she deserved better than what Jack had given her. And she was determined to find happiness on her own terms. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Martha struggled to make ends meet. Jack had taken the apartment and most of their savings, leaving her and Henry with very little. They had to move to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, and Martha had to take on 2 jobs just to pay the bills. But despite the hardship, she was grateful to have her son by her side. Henry was her rock throughout the whole ordeal. He was only 8 years old, but he was wise beyond his years. He comforted her when she cried, and he cheered her up when she was feeling down. One day, Henry came home from school with a drawing he had made in class. It was a picture of the 2 of them, standing in front of their new apartment. "Look, Mom," he said proudly. "I drew us in our new home." Martha smiled through her tears. She knew that they were going to be okay. As long as they had each other, they could get through anything. After the divorce was finalized, Martha was finally able to breathe a little easier. She still had to work hard to make ends meet, but at least she didn't have to worry about Jack anymore. She focused on giving Henry the best life possible, despite their financial struggles. She worked hard to provide for him, and she made sure to spend as much quality time with him as she could. One day, Martha was at work when she received a strange phone call. It was Jack, and he was crying on the other end of the line. He apologized for everything he had done to her and begged for her forgiveness. He said that he had hit rock bottom and that he didn't know where else to turn. Martha was torn. Part of her wanted to tell Jack to go to hell, but another part of her felt sorry for him. She knew what it was like to hit rock bottom, and she didn't want to turn her back on someone in need. So, she agreed to meet with him. Just a moment, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new videos. Help me get 1,000 subscribers. New videos every day. Thank you. Now let's continue. They met in a park, and Jack looked like a shell of his former self. He was thin and pale, and his eyes were sunken in. He told Martha that his mistress had dumped him, and that he had lost everything. He was living in a homeless shelter, and he had hit rock bottom. Martha listened to him, but she didn't know what to say. She still felt hurt and betrayed by him, but she also felt sorry for him. Jack begged for her forgiveness, and he promised that he had changed. He said that he had hit rock bottom and that he didn't want to lose her and Henry. Martha didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part of her was scared to let him back into her life. Over the next few weeks, Jack continued to call Martha and beg for her forgiveness. He promised to do anything to make things right, but Martha remained skeptical. One day, Jack called her and told her that he had a surprise for her and Henry. He refused to tell her what it was, but he said that it would change everything. Martha was wary, but intrigued. She agreed to meet him at a coffee shop to hear him out. When she arrived at the coffee shop, Jack was waiting for her with a big grin on his face. He handed her a piece of paper and told her to read it. It was a deed to a house, and it was in her name. Martha was shocked. She couldn't believe that Jack had given her a house, especially after everything he had put her through. Jack explained that he had inherited the house from his parents, and he had been renting it out for years. He said that he wanted to give it to Martha and Henry as a way of making up for everything he had done. Martha was speechless. She didn't know what to say or how to feel. Part of her was grateful, but another part of her was suspicious. She wondered if Jack was trying to buy her forgiveness. But as she looked at the deed in her hands, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Martha and Jack started to see each other again, but things were different this time. Jack had hit rock bottom and had lost everything, and he seemed genuinely sorry for what he had done. He worked hard to make things right with Martha and Henry, and he spent every moment he could with them. Martha was hesitant at first, but she soon started to see a change in Jack. He was kinder, more patient, and more understanding than he had ever been before. He worked hard to fix up the house he had given them, and he made sure that Martha and Henry had everything they needed. Despite her reservations, Martha started to fall in love with Jack again. She saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, and she couldn't help but forgive him for his past mistakes. Eventually, Jack proposed to Martha, and she said yes. They got remarried in a small ceremony with just their closest friends and family. Martha knew that some people would think she was crazy for taking Jack back, but she didn't care. She had seen the worst in him, but she had also seen the best, and she knew that, no matter what happened, they would face it together. But things were not as perfect as they seemed. As soon as Jack and Martha moved into their new home, strange things started to happen. Objects would move on their own, and doors would slam shut for no reason. At first, Martha thought that it was just her imagination, but then she started to see things. Dark figures lurking in the shadows and strange writing on the walls. She tried to ignore it, but it became impossible. Something was wrong with the house, and she couldn't explain it. Martha didn't know what to do. She didn't want to scare Henry, but she also couldn't keep ignoring the strange occurrences in the house. One day, she decided to confront Jack about it. She asked him if he had noticed anything strange about the house, but he just looked at her like she was crazy. Martha was frustrated. She knew that she wasn't imagining things, but Jack seemed to be in denial. As the weeks went on, the strange occurrences in the house became more frequent and more intense. Martha started to feel like she was losing her mind. One night, she woke up to find Jack standing over her. He was holding a knife and had a strange look in his eyes. Martha screamed and pushed him away, but he just laughed and said that she was overreacting. She knew then that she had to get out of the house. She grabbed Henry and fled to a friend's house. Over the next few days, Martha started to do some research on the house. She discovered that it had a dark past, and that several people had died there under mysterious circumstances. She also learned that Jack had known about the history of the house and had deliberately kept it from her. Martha was devastated. She had trusted Jack, but he had betrayed her once again. She knew that she couldn't go back to the house, but she also knew that she couldn't stay with Jack. She filed for divorce and moved to another state with Henry. It wasn't the ending that she had hoped for, but it was the only way to keep herself and her son safe. Martha tried to put the past behind her and start a new life with Henry. She found a job and a small apartment, and she did her best to create a stable and happy home for her son. But the past was not so easy to escape. Jack continued to hound her, calling her at all hours of the day and night, begging her to take him back. At first, Martha was sympathetic. She knew that Jack had made some terrible mistakes, but she also knew that he was struggling with addiction and mental health issues. But soon, Jack's calls turned into threats. He told her that he would never let her go, and that he would make her regret leaving him. Martha was terrified. She had never seen this side of Jack before, and she didn't know what to do. She tried to get a restraining order, but the process was slow and cumbersome. Meanwhile, Jack continued to harass her, leaving threatening messages and following her wherever she went. One day, Martha came home from work to find her apartment ransacked. Jack had broken in and destroyed everything she owned. That was the last straw. Martha knew that she had to take drastic action to protect herself and her son. She called the police and reported Jack for stalking and harassment. They took her seriously this time, and they arrested Jack and charged him with several crimes. Martha was relieved, but also saddened. She had loved Jack once, and she had hoped that he could get his life back on track. But it seemed like he was too far gone. As the case went to trial, Martha was forced to relive all of the pain and trauma that Jack had caused her. It was a difficult and emotional time, but she knew that it was necessary to get closure. In the end, Jack was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to several years in prison. It was a bittersweet victory for Martha, but it also gave her the closure she needed to move on with her life. Years went by, and Martha continued to build a new life for herself and her son. She eventually met a kind and loving man named Robert, who became a wonderful stepfather to her son. Together, they built a beautiful home and a happy family. Martha's son grew up to be a successful young man, and Martha herself found a fulfilling career in social work. But despite all of the good things in her life, Martha never forgot the pain and trauma of her past. She still carried the scars of Jack's abuse, and she knew that it had shaped her in ways that she couldn't fully understand. One day, out of the blue, Martha received a letter from Jack. He was still in prison, but he had heard that she had moved on with her life and found happiness without him. The letter was full of apologies and regrets. Jack said that he knew he had messed up, and that he was truly sorry for everything he had put Martha through. At first, Martha was hesitant to respond. She didn't want to open up old wounds or invite Jack back into her life. But eventually, she decided to write back. Her letter was honest and compassionate. She told Jack that she forgave him, but that she could never forget what he had done. She wished him well and encouraged him to continue working on himself. Jack never wrote back, but Martha felt a sense of closure and peace that she hadn't felt before. She knew that her past would always be a part of her, but she also knew that it didn't define her. In the end, Martha's story was one of resilience and strength. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and she had come out the other side stronger and more compassionate than ever before. As she looked back on her life, she knew that she had made mistakes and faced unimaginable challenges. But she also knew that she had never given up hope, and that was what had ultimately saved her. Martha's son had grown up to be a successful businessman, and he often reflected on the lessons he had learned from his mother's experiences. He knew that his childhood had been difficult, but he also knew that it had taught him resilience and empathy. He was grateful for his stepfather, who had shown him what a loving and supportive family could look like. One day, as he was going through some old family photos, he came across a picture of his mother and father on their wedding day. He had never seen it before, and he was struck by how young and hopeful they looked. He showed the picture to his mother and asked her about their relationship. Martha told him the whole story, from the early days of their courtship to the bitter end of their marriage. Her son listened intently, and when she finished, he hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said. "You're the strongest person I know." Martha smiled through tears and hugged him back. She knew that her son would carry the lessons of her life with him, just as she had carried the lessons of her own mother's struggles. As she watched her son walk out the door, she felt a sense of gratitude and peace. She knew that her story was far from over, but she also knew that she had come a long way from the frightened young woman who had been thrown out on the street so many years ago. Meanwhile, William had settled into a comfortable life with his mistress. They had a beautiful apartment and enjoyed the finer things in life. But despite the material comforts, William felt a nagging sense of emptiness and guilt. He couldn't shake the memory of Martha's face as he had thrown her and their child out onto the street. He knew he had been cruel and selfish, but he couldn't bring himself to face his actions. One day, as he was sitting in his office, he received a call from his lawyer. "William, I need to talk to you about something important," the lawyer said. "What is it?" William asked, his heart racing. "It's about your ex-wife, Martha," the lawyer said. "She's filed a lawsuit against you." William felt a surge of panic. "What does she want?" he asked. "She's seeking compensation for the apartment and money you took from her," the lawyer said. "She's also seeking damages for emotional distress." William's mind raced as he tried to come up with a way out of the situation. He knew he was in the wrong, but he couldn't bear the thought of facing the consequences of his actions. As he hung up the phone, he felt a sense of despair. He knew he had made a terrible mistake, but he didn't know how to make it right. The lawsuit dragged on for months, and William found himself consumed by anxiety and guilt. He tried to distract himself with work and his mistress, but he couldn't escape the weight of his past. As the trial date approached, William's lawyer advised him to settle out of court. "It's the best way to minimize the damages," the lawyer said. William reluctantly agreed, and a settlement was reached. He would have to pay Martha a large sum of money, and he would also have to issue a public apology for his actions. The day of the apology arrived, and William stood in front of a crowd of reporters and photographers. He spoke haltingly, his voice choked with emotion. "I want to apologize to my ex-wife, Martha," he said. "I was wrong to throw her and our child out onto the street. I was selfish and cruel, and I am truly sorry for the pain I caused." Martha watched the apology on TV, tears streaming down her face. She knew that the road to justice had been long and difficult, but she felt a sense of closure, knowing that William had finally taken responsibility for his actions. As for William, he felt a sense of relief and release after the apology. He knew he could never undo the harm he had caused, but he hoped that by acknowledging his wrongdoing, he could start to make amends. After the settlement, Martha used the money to start a new life for herself and her child. She moved to a new neighborhood and began working at a local nonprofit organization. Despite the challenges she had faced, Martha had come out stronger and more resilient than ever before. She had learned to rely on herself and to never let anyone treat her with disrespect or cruelty again. As for William, he struggled to move on from his past. He tried to make amends by donating to charity and volunteering at local shelters, but he still carried the weight of his mistakes. One day, he received a letter from Martha. "I just wanted to let you know that I forgive you," the letter read. "I know you made a mistake, but we all make mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them and grow as people." William felt a sense of gratitude and relief wash over him as he read the letter. He knew he didn't deserve Martha's forgiveness, but he was grateful for it nonetheless. In the years that followed, William worked to make amends for his past mistakes. He never forgot the pain he had caused, but he used it as a catalyst for positive change in his life. As for Martha, she continued to live a fulfilling and happy life, surrounded by friends and loved ones. She had come out of her difficult experience with a newfound appreciation for the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Years passed, and William grew old. He often thought back to the mistakes he had made in his youth, and he marveled at how much he had learned since then. One day, he received a call from his lawyer. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Martha has passed away," the lawyer said. "She left behind a daughter who has asked to meet you." William was stunned. He had never forgotten Martha, but he never expected to hear from her again. He agreed to meet with her daughter, feeling a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. The meeting was emotional for both of them. Martha's daughter, Sarah, had grown up without a father, but she had always wondered about the man who had caused her mother so much pain. William apologized to Sarah for his past actions, and she forgave him. "My mother always taught me to be compassionate and forgiving," she said. "I know she would have wanted us to make peace." As they talked, William realized that he had never truly let go of his feelings for Martha. Despite everything that had happened, he still loved her in his own way. Sarah saw the sadness in his eyes and said, "You know, my mother always said that forgiveness is the key to happiness. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself too." William took those words to heart, and he began to live his life with a newfound sense of peace and acceptance. He knew he could never undo the mistakes he had made, but he also knew that he could learn from them and grow as a person. As he watched Sarah walk away, he felt a sense of closure and gratitude for the unexpected gift of forgiveness. He knew that Martha would be proud of the man he had become. The years continued to pass, and William found himself reflecting on his life more and more often. He had experienced so much joy and so much pain, but he had learned to appreciate the beauty of both. He had made peace with his past and had come to terms with the mistakes he had made. He had found love again, and this time, he knew how to cherish it. He thought about Martha often, and he knew that she had been a turning point in his life. If he had never met her, he might have continued down a path of self-destruction and unhappiness. But Martha had shown him that there was more to life than money and power. She had shown him the power of love and forgiveness, and those lessons had stayed with him even after she was gone. As William sat in his rocking chair, watching the sun set over the horizon, he smiled to himself. He knew that he had lived a full and meaningful life, filled with both triumphs and setbacks. He had learned that true happiness comes from within, and that the only way to find it is to open your heart to others and to forgive yourself and those who have hurt you. William closed his eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the beauty of the moment. He knew that there would be more challenges to come, but he also knew that he had the strength and resilience to face them with grace and dignity. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared over the horizon, William opened his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Martha. I love you, and I always will." Martha's husband, on the other hand, seemed to have it all. He had a new apartment, a new car, and a new woman who made him feel young and alive again. But deep down, he knew that he had made a mistake. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had abandoned the people who loved him the most, and that he had lost something precious that he could never get back. Despite his guilt and shame, he tried to convince himself that he was better off without Martha and their son. He told himself that he deserved to be happy, and that he had finally found someone who could give him the love and attention he craved. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the truth. He had hurt the people he loved, and nothing he did could change that. As time passed, Martha struggled to make ends meet. She worked long hours at a factory, earning just enough to pay for rent and food. She tried her best to provide for her son, but it was a constant struggle. Despite her hardship, Martha refused to give up hope. She knew that someday things would get better, and she would be able to rebuild her life. One day, Martha's son came to her with news. He had met a woman who was kind and loving, and he wanted to marry her. Martha was overjoyed to hear the news and eagerly welcomed her future daughter-in-law into their family. As Martha watched her son start his own family and build a life of his own, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and joy. She had raised him to be a kind and compassionate person, and seeing him happy and successful was all the reward she needed. But despite the happiness and love that surrounded her, Martha never forgot the pain that her husband had caused. She often wondered what had become of him, and if he ever regretted his decision to leave her and their son behind. Years went by, and Martha's son and daughter-in-law had a son of their own. Martha loved being a grandmother, and she doted on her grandson every chance she got. One day, as she was sitting on the porch with her grandson, she noticed a man walking down the street. At first, she didn't think much of it, but as he got closer, she realized that it was her ex-husband. Martha's heart started racing as she watched him approach. She wasn't sure what to do or say, but she knew that she couldn't just sit there and ignore him. As he got closer, she stood up and faced him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Hello, Martha," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Martha didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, trying to make sense of the flood of emotions that were rushing through her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do it? How could you abandon us like that?" Her ex-husband hung his head, seemingly unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said softly. "I know I messed up. I was young and stupid, and I didn't know what I had until it was gone." Martha felt a surge of anger at his words. "You didn't know what you had. You had a wife who loved you, and a son who adored you. And you threw it all away for what? A fling with some woman you barely knew." Her ex-husband looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but I was unhappy, Martha. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating. And when I met her, I don't know. I felt alive again, you know." Martha didn't know what to say. She could see the pain and regret in her ex-husband's eyes, but it didn't change the fact that he had hurt her and their son deeply. They talked for a while longer, but Martha knew that there was nothing left between them. The love she had once felt for her ex-husband had long since died, replaced by bitterness and resentment. As he left, her ex-husband handed her a small envelope. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to give you this. It's a token of my apology." Martha opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a check for $10,000. She couldn't believe it. It was more money than she had seen in years. Her ex-husband must have seen the shock on her face because he hurriedly said, "I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I want to help. I want to do whatever I can to make things right." Martha didn't know what to say. She felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, suspicion, and disbelief. Could this really be happening? Was her ex-husband finally stepping up and taking responsibility for his actions? Martha thanked her ex-husband and watched as he drove away. She stood in the doorway for a while, clutching the envelope in her hand. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the check. It was a lot of money, but she didn't know if she could trust her ex-husband. What was he up to? Was this some kind of ploy to win her back? She decided to take the check to the bank the next day to see if it was real. If it was, she could really use the money to pay off some of her bills and maybe even find a new place to live. But if it wasn't real, she didn't want to get her hopes up. The next day, Martha took the check to the bank and was relieved to find out that it was indeed real. She couldn't believe her luck. She had enough money to pay off all of her debts and start fresh. Over the next few weeks, Martha slowly started to rebuild her life. She found a new apartment in a safer neighborhood and started taking classes at the local community college. She felt like she was finally taking control of her life again. Despite the progress Martha had made in her life, she still couldn't shake the hurt and betrayal she felt from her ex-husband's actions. She often wondered how he could throw away their life together and their child's well-being for a temporary fling with another woman. Months went by without any contact from her ex-husband. Martha began to think that maybe he had finally moved on from their marriage. However, one day she received a phone call from an unknown number. she answered, and was surprised to hear her ex-husband's voice on the other end. He apologized for what he had done and begged for her forgiveness. He claimed that he had made a huge mistake and that he missed her and their child terribly. Martha was skeptical, but listened as he poured his heart out. He asked if they could meet up to talk things out and see if there was any chance of reconciliation. Martha was torn. She had been hurt so deeply by his actions, but at the same time, she missed him and the life they had built together. After much consideration, Martha agreed to meet with him. She wanted to hear him out and see if he was truly remorseful for what he had done. She also wanted to see if there was any hope for salvaging their relationship. Martha and her ex-husband arranged to meet at a local coffee shop. As she sat waiting for him, she couldn't help but feel nervous and unsure of what to expect. Would he be the same man who had callously thrown her and their child out on the street, or would he be a changed person? When he arrived, he looked worn and haggard. It was clear that he had been going through a tough time since their separation. He sat down across from her and began to speak. He admitted that he had made a huge mistake in leaving her and their child. He said that he had been blinded by his own selfishness and had not realized the value of what he had until it was too late. He begged for her forgiveness and asked if there was any chance for them to start anew. Martha listened to him, her heart heavy with emotion. She could tell that he was sincere in his apology and that he was truly remorseful for his actions. However, she also knew that it would take a lot of work to rebuild the trust that had been broken between them. After much thought and discussion, Martha and her ex-husband decided to give their relationship another chance. They agreed to take things slow and work on rebuilding their trust in each other. Martha was relieved to finally have closure and a chance to move forward from the pain and hurt of their separation. She knew that it would take time, but she was willing to try for the sake of their family. Over the next few weeks, Martha and her ex-husband worked hard to rebuild their relationship. They went to counseling together, communicated openly and honestly, and took the time to get to know each other again. It wasn't easy, but they were both committed to making things work. Slowly but surely, they began to rebuild the trust that had been lost. Martha's ex-husband made a lot of changes in his life, including ending his affair with his mistress and cutting off all contact with her. He also started attending AA meetings and working on his alcohol addiction. Martha was proud of the progress they had made, but she still had some reservations about their relationship. She knew that it would take time to fully trust him again, and she still had some doubts about whether he had truly changed. Despite these doubts, Martha was willing to give their relationship another chance. She loved him, and she believed that they could overcome the obstacles that had led to their separation. One day, Martha's ex-husband surprised her by proposing to her again. He got down on one knee and presented her with a beautiful engagement ring. Martha was shocked and didn't know what to say at first. She had never expected him to propose to her again after everything they had been through. After a few moments of silence, Martha finally said yes. She knew that there were still challenges ahead, but she was willing to take a chance on their love. Over the next few months, Martha and her ex-husband worked hard to plan their wedding. They decided to have a small ceremony with just their closest friends and family. Martha was nervous on their wedding day, but also incredibly happy. She couldn't believe that they had made it this far after everything they had been through. As she stood at the altar and looked into her ex-husband's eyes, Martha knew that she had made the right decision. They were finally starting a new chapter in their lives together. The couple spent their honeymoon in a cozy cabin in the woods. It was a chance for them to reconnect and enjoy each other's company without any distractions. However, their happiness was short-lived. A few weeks after their honeymoon, Martha's ex-husband started acting distant and cold towards her again. She tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed her off and said that he was just stressed from work. Martha didn't believe him, but she didn't want to push the issue either. One day, Martha's ex-husband disappeared without a word. She tried calling him, but his phone was turned off. She went to his office, but he wasn't there. Days turned into weeks, and Martha was left alone and heartbroken once again. She couldn't believe that he had done this to her again, after they had just started a new life together. Eventually, Martha found out the truth. Her ex-husband had been seeing his mistress again, and had left her for good this time. Martha was devastated, but also relieved in a way. She knew that she deserved better than to be treated this way, and that it was time for her to move on and start a new life without him. And so, Martha did just that. She picked up the pieces of her life and moved forward, stronger and more resilient than ever before. She knew that she had learned a valuable lesson, and that she would never let anyone treat her that way again. Years went by, and Martha built a successful career for herself as a writer. She wrote books about love, loss, and resilience, drawing on her own experiences to help others who were going through similar struggles. But despite her success, Martha never forgot about the pain and heartbreak that her ex-husband had caused her. She often wondered what had become of him and his mistress, but she never tried to reach out or find out. That is, until one day when she received a phone call from an unknown number. She answered, and was surprised to hear her ex-husband's voice on the other end. He sounded desperate and panicked, begging her to forgive him for what he had done and asking for her help. Martha was taken aback, but also felt a sense of satisfaction in hearing him so vulnerable and remorseful. She agreed to meet with him, but only out of curiosity. When they met, her ex-husband poured out his heart, telling her about how his mistress had left him and taken all of his money. He was now broke and alone, with no one to turn to. Martha listened to him with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. She couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in seeing him suffer after all that he had put her through. In the end, Martha gave him some money and wished him well, but made it clear that she had no interest in rekindling their relationship or helping him any further. She had moved on and was happy with her life without him. As she walked away from him, Martha felt a sense of closure and peace. She had finally let go of the past and was ready to embrace the future with open arms. The months went by, and the wife and daughter managed to get back on their feet. They rented a small apartment and found jobs to support themselves. They were still struggling, but they had each other, and that was enough. One day, the wife received a call from the husband's mistress. She was crying and told the wife that the husband had left her, taken all her money, and disappeared. The wife felt a sense of satisfaction and even a little bit of revenge. But she also knew what it felt like to be left with nothing. So, she gave the mistress some advice on how to get back on her feet and wished her luck. The husband was never heard from again. The wife and daughter moved on with their lives and created a new happy life for themselves. They learned to appreciate the little things in life and were grateful for what they had. As for the husband, he lost everything he thought was important and ended up alone with nothing but regrets. It was a hard lesson, but one that needed to be learned. The wife's story became an inspiration to many women, and she was invited to speak at various events. She shared her story and gave hope to those who were going through similar situations. In the end, the wife realized that she was much stronger than she thought she was. She learned to trust herself and her abilities. And most importantly, she learned to love herself, something she had forgotten how to do during her marriage. I hope this story touched you and maybe even taught you something. Life can be unpredictable, and we never know what the future holds. But with perseverance, hope, and a little luck, we can overcome even the greatest challenges. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you again on this channel soon. Subscribe so you don't miss any more exciting stories.